Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Michael Zuber, one rental at a time, back with our wonderful and legendary guest, Anna Kelly. How you doing, Anna?
I'm great today. It's always so good to be here with you on Wednesdays.
Thank you for that. We had a little pause there, folks, but we're back, so that's good. We're good. You can hear me, yes?
Yes.
Awesome. So what I want to talk about in this episode is I want to talk about the next decade, right? So we're going to look out. Your crystal ball is as broken as mine, but we're going to talk about the next decade because sometimes we get lost in talking about this quarter, this year, next year. I want to talk about the next decade. And really, when I look at the next decade, broadly speaking, I think we could potentially go down one of two paths. One is the roaring 20s, right? To use a word that's referred to the 1920s, or we could be back to a longer period of stagflation than we probably would like. So I don't know where you come down on either of those. I'm happy to talk about either one first, but I kind of want to hit both sides of the fence if you don't mind.
Yeah, I like the first thing you said is that our crystal balls may be broken, right?
Yeah.
We can look back to the past and gain a lot of wisdom. And we've done a lot of that on this show, looking back at the last 50 years of real estate and where have incomes been and where have interest rates been and where have housing prices been. And what was really eye-opening is through that whole thing, housing has been pretty affordable from the beginning. There's blips and, in the 70s and things we can talk about, but generally speaking, America has a way of figuring it out. But America also, and our legislators have a way of forgetting the things that hurt us and getting ourselves right back in it.
Yeah.
And then, during the pandemic, I saw, wow, when things started to fall, I thought this is going to go bad really fast. And it surprised me how the government reacted to inject so much capital into the system to keep things going afloat. So it gave me hope that they can figure things out when they need to. But the question is, what's the fallout of all the money that they've injected into the system?
Mm-hmm.
And what's going to happen when that runs out? And who's going to pay for it? And how does that impact taxes and incomes and our ability and motivation to start businesses and to continue to provide housing? And all of those things I have concerns about, right?
Mm-hmm.
The question is, where is it going to go and how quickly? And I really don't know the answer to that. But what I've learned is we have to say, what if it goes this way? What's the worst thing that could happen?
Exactly.
How will I mitigate that with what I'm doing as a business owner and an investor? And then what if it goes the other way that I don't see it coming? How would I mitigate that? And I've basically learned to look at risk, to learn how to mitigate risk, and to kind of set up my portfolio and what I'm doing in such a way that regardless of what comes, I'm as protected as I possibly can imagine. And it leaves less things to chance that could really destroy me financially, right? So I tend to not think we're going to have the roaring 20s. I'm not sure, I think we're heading toward inflation for sure. We're already in it. The question is how bad and how long before it blows up and things crater. And I just don't know the answer to that. I don't know, but I'm suspecting that we're going to have a slow recovery and we could have some steps back before we figure it all out as a people, as our politicians that are making monetary policy and fix whatever is to come.
Yeah, it's kind of the leading. It's kind of the leading. I don't know, the leading horse right now is kind of that picture, right? Inflation is certainly more of a concern for me than Powell is letting on.
Yeah.
I just did in my daily financial news this morning. I don't have it with me. I'll do it from memory. Right. I looked at July inflation and everybody's looking at airline tickets, used cars, lumber, those things are just off the chart. Right. I looked down the chart at food, housing, and rent. And all of these things are smoldering. I think housing was 3.4%. I don't know about you, but housing's up much more than 3%. Food was like 2.4%. I don't know about you, but food's up a lot more than 2.4%. And then, oh my God, rent was up 1.9% in the July numbers. And everybody I talked to across the country, rents are up double digits. So for me, these these are the smoldering numbers, like a pot of water that's going to eventually boil over and be a real problem. So yeah, I think inflation is going to be a problem, which then forces Feds to raise rates. I think the Fed raises rates next year. Right now, they're talking 2023. I think they're just
agree.
frankly wrong.
Yes.
So, I see that. And oh, by the way, taxes have to go up. It's no longer optional. They have to go up. And so yeah, I think stagflation right now is kind of like, well, and again, the reason I picked a decade is I wanted to take the president out of it and politics out of it, because we'll have an election. Shoot, we'll have 3 elections, right? So it could flip flop. But I think the bed, the bedroom or the bed's made, and we've got a decade to pay for it, and it's going to be more uncomfortable than people think.
Absolutely. And part of the reason that we don't really know what's going to happen is because there is some legislative risk, depending on who is in party. While there's a lot more things that, both parties come together and work together, despite the news showing that they're so polarized. When it comes to fiscal policy and monetary policy, the Democrats and the Republicans have very different views on how do you stimulate the economy and how do you make it better. One party tends to dump more money in. The other wants to kind of pull some money out. One party wants to, give everybody a handout. The other one wants to say, let's give them tax cuts to incentivize them to employ more people and do different things. And so because we don't know, it could really go either way, right? Yeah. But to your point about a decade, typically speaking, at least in the real estate market, and when you look at the peaks of expansion and the troughs of contraction and depression and recession, usually it's about every 10 years that we go from one extreme to the other. So I'm seeing where housing is kind of crazy. We're really in recession mode, and the only reason there's recovery right now is because of all the money that's been put in. So typically speaking, from recession up, you've got 18 to 24 months of recession, and you've got 2 or 3 years of recovery before you hit like year 5, where you start to have growth for another 5 or 6 years before it all comes back down again. So I tend to think we're at the bottom and we're going to have a slow recovery. And the question is, when does it really start correcting itself? How quickly? And are we really thinking about 10 years out and 20 years out, what things could look like? And are we preparing ourselves, to make our investments really ironclad, that they can weather these different storms?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons we talked last week. I'm very focused on residential financing, because if you want to give me a gift of cheap 30-year money right now, given what I see in the next decade, I'm going to take all the 30-year money I can. And that includes refining a couple of free and clear properties to add the cash, get cheap 30-year debt.
Yes.
And then I'll deploy it. I am happy to sit on that and let inflation eat it away for a couple of years. I will find a time to deploy it. So yeah, that's certainly what I see. And again, for me, it's that, 30-year debt, never been this cheap. So I'm going to go get as much as I can.
Absolutely. And so when you have inflation, you want to buy assets. In fact, that's what I'm going to be posting on today on my social media accounts later this afternoon, is really acquiring assets is that can help you during inflation continue to have your wealth go up, the income from those assets go up, so that, even if taxes start to go up, well, rents will go up to account. Assets is a really smart thing to do when you see inflation coming.
Yeah, totally agree. And just to wrapping this up, I don't know if you saw this, but Palantir, it's a software company, if you don't happen to know them, they just bought $50 million of gold bars. Their cash balance was so high, they decided to buy gold bars. And you've been in finance a long time. I have never seen a company where on their balance sheet, it's going to say gold bars.
Wow.
I've never seen cash be something that people just repulse from. It's kind of crazy.
Yes. And that tells you, for those that we've kind of beat this drum before, but when there's inflation in prices, it's deflation of the dollar, because the dollar no longer has the same purchasing power it did to buy the same things that are now more expensive. So when you're looking to hedge the deflation of the dollar and its purchasing power to buy the things that are more expensive, gold is a dollar deflation hedge that you want to deploy when you think there's an inflation coming. And there are a lot of financial advisors that actually tell you should have 8 to 10% of your wealth in coins, in gold and silver. I've bought some. I keep it in multiple locations so I can never get robbed, right? Buried in backyards and farms. No, I'm just kidding. But you can buy gold and silver through EFTs. You can buy gold and silver physical, gold and silver. You can buy it and have it stored in, other countries in their safes. But gold and silver can be a really good hedge. The reason silver is a good hedge, it's kind of like the poor man's gold, right? We can't go out and buy $50 million of gold bars. And an ounce of gold, a gold coin is like $1,800 right now, I think. I haven't been tracking it in the last few days, but, fairly expensive. Well, if I need to trade for bread, to the farmer down the street, $1,800 isn't going to help me. But if I have a $20 gold, silver coin, maybe I can trade for bread. And it's kind of this doomsday thinking, and we don't want to go doomsday. But the reality is when economies don't pull it together and they have deflation of their currency, that can lead to severe economic collapse for a country. We've seen it in many different countries that have gone toward socialism and then destroyed their economies. And what happens is people can't make a living. And so they have to trade, they have to barter. And that's been that same thinking for, since the US government was founded, is if we have something that's a backup, that's real currency that works no matter what happens with the government, it gives us a little bit of a hedge. And so that's why they're buying gold, because it's a hedge against the devaluing of the dollar.
I've never seen it on a company balance sheet. I'm just curious because you've been doing this as long as I have. Have you ever seen a company with gold bars, like other than a gold mining company, of course, but I mean, I've never seen
I have not.
Okay.
No.
Yeah. So again, what I would say is these are interesting times, right? You have companies going out and buying gold bars. So it's pretty interesting. So Anna, how can people follow you and be part of your world?
I am on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Anna REI Mom Kelly. And you can find me at greaterpurposecapital.com, my company where we take investors' money, we put it all together, we buy large apartment buildings, and we pour into the residents into that apartment building so that we can really change their lives, give them financial literacy, and make a difference in their lives with our investment dollars while we make ourselves strong returns as well.
Do yourself a favor, folks. Go to greaterpurposecapital.com right now. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Michael.